America's retail meltdown is here, and it's brutal. Over $30 billion in revenue is evaporating, more than 50,000 workers are losing jobs, and once iconic chains are drowning in debt that tops $5 billion. Tariffs have pushed import costs up by 25%, turning cheap $15 dresses into $25 burdens and $500 sofas into $650 luxuries. Malls are emptier than ever, with foot traffic collapsing 20% year over year, and stores that once made millions are bleeding red ink. This isn't just decline, it's collapse. These are the 10 U.S. retailers vanishing right before our eyes. Number 10. Macy's. Macy's, once the symbol of American retail glory, is now unraveling right before our eyes. Back in the early 2000s, Macy's boasted over 800 stores and revenue north of $24 billion. Fast forward to 2025, and the company has announced another 150 closures, leaving it with roughly 350 to 400 locations nationwide. Sales are shrinking at double-digit rates, and store traffic has dried up as consumers shift online. But what's really accelerated Macy's collapse is the cost shock triggered by Trump's tariff war. Macy's depends heavily on imports. Over 70% of its apparel and home goods are sourced from countries like China, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. Tariffs of 10 to 25% on textiles, handbags, and consumer goods directly inflated Macy's costs. A pair of jeans that once cost $15 wholesale now lands closer to $20 after tariff surcharges. Multiply that across millions of units, and Macy's faces hundreds of millions in additional supply chain costs. The company tried raising prices, but middle-class shoppers, already crushed by inflation and mortgage hikes, simply walked away. For a household earning $60,000 a year, a $70 blouse at Macy's isn't worth it when Shein sells something similar for $12. Debt is another anchor. Macy's carries billions in long-term obligations, with interest payments rising sharply as rates hover near 7%. Labor costs also chew into margins, with payroll alone topping $3 billion annually. Meanwhile, utilities and property taxes on massive flagship stores, like the Herald Square location in Manhattan, cost tens of millions a year. In this environment, Macy's can't compete with leaner online rivals. Investors fear Macy's is headed down the same path as Sears, a drawn-out collapse where stores close one by one. The tariffs, coupled with inflation and debt, have turned an already struggling retailer into a ticking time bomb. Number 9. CVS. CVS, one of America's largest pharmacy and retail chains, is quietly retreating from its once dominant footprint. In 2015, CVS operated nearly 9,700 stores, but by 2025, it has announced closures of over 900 locations, with hundreds more expected by 2026. On paper, the company still reports annual revenues above $300 billion. Yet its retail arm, the familiar stores selling everything from aspirin to cosmetics, is bleeding out. Same-store sales in the front end have declined by nearly 12% year over year, as consumers shift to online orders and discount chains. Trump's trade war has had an outsized effect here. CVS imports a significant share of its non-pharmacy inventory, everything from seasonal decor to personal care items. With tariffs of 15 to 25% slapped on consumer goods from China and Southeast Asia, CVS has seen cost spikes in over 40% of its merchandise categories. A bottle of imported shampoo that cost $2.50 wholesale now costs over $3, forcing retail prices higher. For a budget-conscious customer already spending $500 a month on prescriptions, that extra $1 adds up. Many simply defect to dollar stores or Walmart. Operating costs are also spiraling. Each CVS store employs roughly 15 to 20 workers, which means payroll across the chain tops $6 billion annually. Add in rising rent, insurance, and utilities, and margins thin to the breaking point. In major metro areas, crime and theft have become such an issue that some CVS locations now lose $200,000 annually in shrink. Combine that with tariffs inflating costs, and it's no wonder CVS has pulled the plug on hundreds of underperforming outlets. The company is pivoting toward healthcare hubs, minute clinics, insurance services, and digital prescriptions. But that doesn't solve the retail collapse. CVS may survive as a health insurer, but the CVS drugstore on the corner is rapidly disappearing, another casualty of tariffs, inflation, and shifting consumer behavior. Number 8. Family Dollar. Family Dollar, long seen as the discount safety net for low-income households, is buckling under pressure. Once operating over 8,000 stores nationwide, the chain has announced closures of at least 600 locations in 2025, with more under review. Even though its parent company, Dollar Tree, reports revenues exceeding $30 billion, Family Dollar has become its weakest link. Shoppers complain about poor store conditions, limited staffing, and rising prices that undercut its discount identity. The Trump tariff war hits Family Dollar harder than most. Nearly 90% of its inventory, cheap toys, household goods, clothing basics, kitchen items, is imported from China. Tariffs of 10 to 25% have inflated the cost of these essentials, and a broom that once wholesaled for $2 is now closer to $2.60. Multiply that across millions of products, and the chain faces tens of millions in added expenses annually. Family Dollar tried to pass the costs along, but when toothpaste jumps from $1 to $1.50, low-income shoppers earning under $35,000 a year notice and leave. Margins were already razor-thin. Each Family Dollar store brings in about $1.3 to $1.5 million annually, but rent, payroll for 10 to 12 employees, utilities, and tariffs squeeze profits close to zero. Theft compounds the problem, with shrinkage rates as high as 3 to 4% of sales. Unlike Walmart, Family Dollar doesn't have the scale to absorb losses. In many rural towns, the company has simply walked away, leaving empty storefronts as economic scars. The fallout is enormous. Job losses affect tens of thousands of hourly workers, and in small towns, closures eliminate the only nearby retail option. What was once a lifeline for America's struggling families is now being hollowed out by tariffs, inflation, and neglect. Family Dollar is collapsing into a shell of its former self, dragging Dollar Tree's reputation down with it. Number 7. Rite Aid. Rite Aid, America's third-largest drugstore chain, is in full-blown collapse. At its peak, it ran over 4,800 stores, but today, fewer than 1,800 remain, with another 500 closures announced for 2025. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in late 2024, crushed by debt exceeding $3.5 billion and rising costs. Revenues, once nearly $25 billion, have shriveled to under $18 billion. For investors and employees, it's been a free fall. One key driver of Rite Aid's demise is its outdated business model. Unlike CVS or Walgreens, Rite Aid failed to diversify into insurance or health hubs. Instead, it stayed reliant on front-end retail sales and slim pharmacy margins. Enter Trump's tariffs. The chain's shelves are stocked with low-cost imports, greeting cards, cosmetics, personal care items, much of it sourced from China and Vietnam. Tariffs of 20 to 25% on consumer goods inflated wholesale prices by hundreds of millions annually. For a retailer that already had margins of just 2 to 3%, this was catastrophic. Debt piled on top. With interest rates near 7%, Rite Aid's annual interest expense now exceeds $200 million. Payroll for its 40,000 employees consumes another $2 billion annually, while many of its older urban stores generate less than $1 million in revenue per year. Theft and crime have also skyrocketed. In cities like Philadelphia and San Francisco, shrinkage eats up 5% of total sales, forcing entire districts to close. Consumers have shifted to competitors. Walmart and Costco pharmacies offer cheaper prescriptions, while online options like Amazon Pharmacy are undercutting prices nationwide. Meanwhile, shoppers earning $50,000 or less annually can't stomach higher prices on everyday goods inflated by tariffs. Rite Aid's collapse is leaving pharmacy deserts across rural and urban America, with entire communities losing access to medication. What was once a familiar neighborhood drugstore is now vanishing, another victim of debt, tariffs, and an unforgiving market. Number 6. Bargain Hunt. Bargain Hunt was once a rising star in the discount retail world, carving out a niche by selling overstock and liquidation goods at rock-bottom prices. At its peak, the chain operated around 90 to 95 stores across the South and Midwest, generating steady revenue from budget-conscious families. But by 2025, Bargain Hunt filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and announced liquidation of all stores, leaving thousands jobless and communities with yet another shuttered retailer. The collapse stems partly from the changing retail ecosystem, but was magnified by Trump's trade war. Bargain Hunt relied heavily on importing overstock shipments, often purchased in bulk from Asia. Tariffs of 15 to 25% on Chinese consumer goods, ranging from electronics to toys, raised its wholesale costs by millions annually. A shipment of televisions once acquired for $150 per unit jumped closer to $190 after tariffs, making it impossible for Bargain Hunt to deliver the deep discounts that defined its identity. Customers who used to find $300 TVs for $180 were now seeing prices nearly as high as Walmart. Operating costs didn't help. With each store employing 20 to 25 workers, payroll ballooned to over $60 million annually, while rent and logistics costs climbed sharply. Revenue per store averaged $5 to $7 million a year, but with tariffs eroding margins and consumer spending tightening, profitability evaporated. Theft also surged, especially in urban stores, with shrinkage eating up 3 to 4% of sales. The final nail in the coffin was competition. Dollar General, Walmart, and even Amazon offered similar deals at scale, often without tariff-related markups to better supply chain leverage. Bargain Hunt simply lacked the muscle to absorb costs or negotiate favorable terms. The liquidation in 2025 marked the end of a chain that once promised cheap thrills for bargain hunters. Instead, tariffs and inflation turned the hunt into a losing game, leaving empty shelves where discount havens once stood. Number 5. Big Lots. Big Lots, the Ohio-based discount retailer, is another casualty in America's retail unraveling. Operating nearly 1,400 stores nationwide, the chain specialized in furniture, home goods, and seasonal merchandise. By 2025, however, Big Lots filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy after years of declining sales, reporting revenue down nearly 20% year over year, from $6 billion in 2022 to under $5 billion in 2024. The company's market value, once over $2 billion, has crumbled to pennies on the dollar. Big Lots' vulnerability is tied to its import-heavy inventory. Over 70% of its furniture and home decor comes from Chinese and Vietnamese factories. Trump's tariffs of 10 to 25% on these categories added hundreds of millions in costs annually. A couch that once landed in U.S. warehouses at $200 wholesale shot up to $250 post-tariff. Passing those costs to consumers proved disastrous. For families making around $55,000 a year, a sofa priced at $500, now closer to $650, was out of reach. Margins collapsed. Each Big Lots store generates roughly $4 to $6 million annually, but with tariffs, rising rents, payroll for 15,000 employees nationwide, and utilities, many stores slipped into red ink. Losses exceeded $100 million in 2024 alone. Competition also squeezed Big Lots. Walmart, Target, and Amazon now dominate the same low to mid-range furniture and decor segment, often with faster shipping and better pricing. Big Lots' discount reputation evaporated once tariffs pushed its prices nearly in line with mainstream retailers. To survive, Big Lots tried pivoting to groceries and essentials, but its stores lacked the infrastructure for perishable supply chains. The effort backfired, leaving aisles half-stocked and consumers frustrated. By 2025, bankruptcy filings confirmed what shoppers already knew. Big Lots had lost its identity and financial footing. Tariffs only accelerated the inevitable collapse. Number 4. Walgreens. Walgreens, America's second-largest drugstore chain, is enduring one of the most dramatic retail contractions of the decade. In 2020, Walgreens operated over 9,200 U.S. stores, But by 2025, it has announced closures of 500 more locations, with long-term plans to trim as many as 1,200 stores by 2027. Revenue, once topping $132 billion annually, has stagnated, while operating income has fallen by double digits. The trade war has been particularly brutal for Walgreens' retail division. While prescriptions remain its backbone, front-end sales, cosmetics, vitamins, snacks, household goods represent billions in revenue. Tariffs of 15 to 25% on consumer goods imported from China inflated costs across 30 to 40% of its retail product lines. A multivitamin bottle that once cost $5 wholesale now costs $6, forcing shelf prices up to $12 to $14. For shoppers earning $50,000 annually, Walgreens stopped being competitive compared to Walmart or dollar stores. Operating costs are immense. Each store employs an average of 20 to 25 workers, with annual payroll exceeding $7 billion chain-wide. Add in rent and utilities, plus an estimated $300 million annually in theft and shrinkage, and Walgreens is drowning. Inflation worsened the pain, as everyday goods became too expensive for lower-income shoppers, eroding traffic by nearly 10% year over year. The company has also been hammered by lawsuits tied to the opioid crisis, with settlements expected to cost Walgreens over $5 billion in the coming years. Coupled with tariffs and rising interest rates, the financial squeeze is relentless. Walgreens is trying to pivot into healthcare clinics and digital prescriptions, but its retail core, the neighborhood drugstore, continues collapsing. Investors are already whispering that Walgreens could follow Rite Aid's path: bankruptcy or forced consolidation. With tariffs raising costs and lawsuits draining billions, Walgreens' decline feels less like a stumble and more like a slow-motion implosion. Number 3. Claire's. Claire's, once the go-to accessory shop for teens and preteens, has entered bankruptcy for the second time in less than a decade. At its peak, Claire's operated over 2,500 stores worldwide, with more than 1,100 in the US alone, generating billions in annual sales. But by 2025, the company filed Chapter 11 again, warning that up to 1,000 stores could close, leaving tens of thousands of employees at risk. Claire's downfall has been driven by multiple pressures, and tariffs have been especially punishing. Nearly 90% of Claire's inventory, from jewelry to hair accessories to novelty items, is imported from China and Southeast Asia. Trump's tariffs of 15 to 25% on consumer goods inflated wholesale costs dramatically. A pack of earrings that once cost $2 to import now costs closer to $2.50 to $2.70. Across millions of units, that's tens of millions in extra expenses each year. For a company that relied on margins of 5 to 7%, this was devastating. Consumers also shifted. Teen shoppers earning allowances or parents making under $60,000 annually are now turning to cheaper online rivals like Shein, Temu, and Amazon. Why pay $15 at Claire's for a necklace when a similar one sells online for $3 with free shipping? Foot traffic in malls, where most Claire's stores are located, has also collapsed by nearly 20% year over year, cutting off its customer base. Debt is another crushing factor. Claire's carries over $1.3 billion in liabilities, with annual interest payments exceeding $100 million. Rent and payroll for 10 to 12 employees per store add hundreds of millions more to operating costs. Meanwhile, shrinkage from theft averages 3% of sales, erasing already razor-thin profits. In 2025, private equity buyers are circling to scoop up parts of the brand, but for most stores, the writing is on the wall. Claire's is no longer the mall staple it once was. Tariffs, debt, and collapsing mall culture have pushed it toward permanent decline. Number 2. Forever 21. Forever 21, once a fast fashion empire, is now another retail giant in collapse. Founded in 1984, the chain grew explosively to over 800 stores worldwide, with revenues peaking near $4.4 billion. But by 2025, Forever 21 has filed for bankruptcy again, its second major collapse in recent memory, closing hundreds of stores and walking away from costly leases in malls across America. The brand's business model hinged on importing cheap clothing, and Trump's tariffs shattered its cost structure. Nearly 70% of Forever 21's apparel comes from China and Southeast Asia. Tariffs of 10 to 25% on textiles and apparel meant that a dress that once landed at $6 wholesale now cost closer to $7.50. Spread across tens of millions of units annually, Forever 21 faced $150 to $200 million in extra costs. Unlike premium brands, Forever 21 couldn't simply raise prices without alienating its cost-sensitive shoppers. A $15 shirt at Forever 21 is no bargain when Shein sells a similar one for $8. Foot traffic was already plummeting. Mall visits are down nearly 25% compared to pre-pandemic levels, and Forever 21's massive stores, some over 30,000 square feet, are expensive to maintain, costing millions in rent and utilities annually. Payroll for 30 to 50 employees per store adds further burden, with chain-wide labor costs exceeding $500 million annually. The company also struggled with debt, owing billions to landlords and creditors. Interest payments ballooned as rates climbed near 7%, eating into already thin margins. By 2025, Forever 21's revenues had fallen below $2 billion, a staggering 50% collapse from its peak. In the end, tariffs made cheap clothes less cheap, debt made operations unsustainable, and consumer trends shifted online. Forever 21's collapse is the clearest sign yet that mall-based fast fashion can't survive in a tariff-heavy, digital-first world. Number 1. Joann. Joann, the iconic fabric and crafts retailer, is the latest major name to implode. With nearly 850 stores nationwide, Joann was once the backbone for hobbyists, quilters, and crafters, generating annual revenues around $2.5 billion. But in 2025, Joann filed for bankruptcy for the second time in just over a year, announcing closures of 500 locations and liquidating the rest after failing to find a buyer. The collapse is tightly linked to tariffs. Over 70% of Joann's fabrics, yarns, and craft supplies are sourced overseas, primarily from China, India, and Vietnam. Trump's tariffs of 20 to 25% on textiles and raw materials inflated Joann's costs by tens of millions annually. A bolt of fabric that once cost $20 wholesale now lands closer to $25, and a simple craft kit that retailed at $10 has crept toward $15. For families earning $50,000 to $70,000 a year, these price hikes were enough to cut back on discretionary crafts. Joann also suffers from oversized stores. Many locations exceed 25,000 square feet, with rent and utilities costing upwards of $500,000 annually. Payroll for 30 to 40 employees per store pushed total labor expenses beyond $600 million chain-wide, an impossible burden once sales collapsed. Same-store sales are down nearly 15% year-over-year, and e-commerce competitors like Amazon and Etsy have stolen loyal craft shoppers by offering cheaper, tariff-free alternatives. Debt sealed Joann's fate. Carrying more than $1 billion in liabilities, the company couldn't refinance at reasonable rates as borrowing costs surged. Shrinkage from theft, averaging 2 to 3% of sales, only added more bleeding. Joann's liquidation is symbolic. Once a hub of creativity and community classes, its collapse shows how tariffs and inflation can devastate a specialty retailer. The aisles that once overflowed with fabric rolls and holiday decor are now empty shells, casualties of a trade war that priced creativity out of reach.